Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. No, it's 2 o'clock on the dot, so we'll give everyone a minute or two to join, but thank you so much for coming. We're so excited for our panel on building a B2B sales team today. Welcome. I'm Emily St. Dennis, an operating partner at Female Founders Fund. So for those who aren't familiar with Female Founders Fund, we are the largest seed stage venture fund that invests exclusively in female-founded companies. Hopefully you're familiar with some of those companies. Obviously includes Maven Clinic, who will be featured today, Billy, Bento Box, CoStar, Peanut, Zola, Tala, a lot of great companies, Winky Lux. Check out our website, femalefoundersfund.com, for the full portfolio. We're very excited to kick off today's virtual panel on building a B2B sales team, which is co-hosted by our amazing partners at Amazon Web Services. We got such great reception. We have almost 500 RSVPs, so hopefully it will be a very lively discussion today. Wanted to thank everyone who submitted questions during the registration process. We received hundreds of questions and have integrated as many as possible into today's conversation. So hopefully you'll get everyone's questions answered. I wanted to introduce our speakers before kicking it off to Sherry, who will be moderating the conversation. The talk today will feature Maven Clinic founder and CEO, Kate Ryder, and her VP of Employer Growth, Isha Vij. So for those who are not familiar, Maven offers virtual care and services across fertility, maternity, pediatrics, and menopause, and operates the largest women's and family health telehealth global network globally. So just to give you some context around why we chose Isha and Kate to speak on the B2B sales conversation, they launched all the way back in 2014 as one of the women's first healthcare platform. And today, Maven covers over 15 million lives under management, and they count more than half of the Fortune 15 as clients. They have health plans, including Blue Shield of California, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, and Mass Health. So definitely very experienced on the B2B sales side and building out a team to be able to accomplish those goals over the past couple of years. The panel conversation will be moderated by Sherry Karamdashti. She's the sales director for AWS Startups. So excited to have her here. She has extensive sales experience and deep knowledge in building and scaling teams in cloud computing, machine learning, analytics, and B2B software. For the past 10 years at Amazon, Sherry's brought her passion for startups to help them adopt agile development models, accelerate enablement, and go to market for business success. So Sherry's going to dig into Kate's experience building out Maven Clinic's first sales team, the lessons learned along the way, Isha's best practices for startup founders and sales leaders, how hiring has been going in this moment in time, any advice and suggestions for newer founders who are building their sales team out for the first time, and also going into how Maven Clinic measures success and more. So with that, I'll kick it off to Sherry. Thank you so much for joining us today, and let's begin.
Hi, Emily. Thank you for that great intro. I'm so excited to be joined here and moderate with our panelists, Kate and Isha. Hi, ladies. Thanks for joining. I'm going to jump into the questions. We have some really good ones to cover today. Let's start with Kate. So Kate, I talked to a lot of founders. I feel that having one of the top qualities, I think, is being a strong, salesperson and having strong sales acumen. You obviously need to communicate your vision. You need to present opportunities to potential investors or employees and partners, especially in the early days. So tell me a little bit of how you approached acting as Maven's first salesperson.
Sure. Well, thank you. By the way, everyone can hear me, right? The mute's working. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and so happy to talk about all the things that we did wrong. So many people on the phone don't make the same mistakes. But yeah, I mean, listen, I think there were a lot of things I didn't know coming into starting a company. My background is in journalism mostly, and venture capital. But the one thing I think that journalism certainly taught me is the importance of storytelling and the importance of a story. And so I think, and then also the other thing is, always from day one, I've been a user of Maven and a user of our product. So I really, really knew our product. I was, our head of product in the very early days as well. And so I think having that storytelling combined with a deep understanding of and passion for the product itself was important, and it allowed me to kind of march into a market that I didn't know much about, and really just tell the story of where the gaps were in women's health and how the Maven product was solving them.
Were there any skills that you had to develop that you weren't anticipating you needed?
Well, on the fundraising side, certainly. I had sat inside of a VC firm for 2 years. And when I got on the other side of it, I didn't realize what a process you have to run and how, I understood how investors think, but I didn't understand the process that one has to run to really drive a deal to completion. So I think learning some of that in the early days of our seed and Series A fundraising was actually really helpful then when we were getting into some of our larger enterprise sales early on. We had already done, the deals, so to speak, on the fundraising side. And so then it was, making sure that you were doing a consultative sale. Certainly with investors, there was a lot who weren't interested in women's health in the early days. And so I kissed a lot of frogs to get our first rounds of funding. And one of the things I learned there is to make sure that I didn't have these long meetings with investors that weren't interested in the business in the first place. And so I would be very consultative and ask investors proactively, do you have a thesis here? Have you invested in healthcare before? And so applying that to some of our first enterprise sales, I think was also really important to understand, okay, what are the problems you're trying to solve for your employees? What specifically are you hearing from your employees? What pain points you're trying to solve? And so, that consultation, I think, is just so important, particularly for very, complex markets like healthcare.
So most early startups, right? It's first founder-led, right? And then you go from founder-led to maybe hiring your first 1 or 2 salespeople, and ultimately, hopefully, right, you're hiring to scale and grow. Kate, when did you know it was time to make that first sales hire?
Well, I think it was maybe after someone told me once, like, go sell your first 8 to 10 deals. And, they're very small at first. And so when we really started to actually have a pipeline, this was back in let's see, we sold our first deal 6 months after we launched in 2015. And then I think we were at about 10 deals kind of about a year later in 2016. And it was a very immature market at the time. And so that was where I believe we brought on our first sales people right after our Series A in 2017. So you have to be able to afford them, right? And seed stage, when you really are strapped for cash, I think the founder, if they're able to do this, really should take it on. But then, it was really our Series A where we were able to kind of allocate more budget to sales and marketing, and not be extremely scrappy was when we hired it. And I will say the one thing that I think was really, really important for me in the early days, having not come from a sales background and quite frankly, not even a corporate background or an MBA, was I surrounded myself with advisors across a lot of different areas. And so sales was one of them. So there's this wonderful woman, Michelle Shepard, who was a chief revenue officer of a lot of different companies. And she worked with PE firms and would come in and transform a sales team and then move out. And so someone introduced me to Michelle, and she was, she really cared a lot about female founders. And so I made her an advisor, and I just had monthly calls with her. And so she was actually really instrumental in helping me understand how to build a sales org, what metrics we should be looking at, how to hire great people. And, you know, I was a newbie, so I didn't always get it right in the early days, but she was certainly very helpful in helping me understand what best in class looked like.
Awesome. We are going to get to the hiring and setting goals in a minute. I'm going to go over to Isha. So you joined Maven Clinic as VP of Employer Growth in 2021.
Yeah.
What did the team look like when you joined, and you know, how has it changed since in the past 2 years?
Yeah. Short answer is completely. When I joined Maven, there were a few things that Kate had clearly done really well in terms of the hires that she had made. I believe our sales team on the employer growth side was about 6 people when I first joined the organization. And they were clearly incredibly driven and passionate about what Maven was doing. And they really just needed more structure and process in place. So when I think about sort of what has changed and evolved over the last year and a half or so that I've been here, one is just around better defining a sales process, having a consistent way in which we are thinking about what stage a deal is in, having really clear entry and exit criteria, and also identifying, you know, what is our methodology for how we're going to sell. At Maven, for example, we used value-based selling. There's a ton out there, but we've aligned around making sure that we're essentially delivering value in each conversation at each stage of the sales process, and also invested a lot in team-based selling, figuring out who are the right people to bring in to really sort of get a deal in motion, give it momentum, give it legs, and ultimately get it over the line. So focus has really been there. Second, around hiring the right people. I mentioned there are about 6 individuals on the employer growth side when I joined. Today, I think that number is probably around 18 or 19. So we've scaled pretty meaningfully and have invested a lot of time and effort to bring in the folks that are going to be right for Maven at this stage of our growth. And then, of course, when you bring them in, how are we making sure that we're training them and supporting them, that they're continuously learning and growing in their own careers? Of course, goal setting expectations, and really, especially in such a fast growth environment, making sure that we're creating a really palpably, meaningfully positive and productive culture on the team as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue. My next question. I do think having that strong, productive, positive, customer-focused sales culture is really important. How have you thought about that building that sales culture and Maven's sales culture?
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about it in terms of what do I want to preserve from what's been here since the beginning, right? And then what are the things that make sense to integrate and evolve as we continue to grow? So what was really clear when I joined as a part of the culture is that it was very clear that the team was incredibly passionate about what Maven was doing. And it's very hard not to be passionate about what Maven is doing, especially when you start to hear about what kind of impact we're having on women and families really across the world at this point. And so we wanted that to really be at the heart of the sales team, right? To understand that there is, of course, a very, very meaningful commercial opportunity, but the why behind what we're doing definitely wanted to preserve. And then there are a few things that Kate and I actually talked a lot about integrating. One of the values that she and I share, and this became very clear, I think the first time that she and I connected, is how do we bring a culture of really candid, real-time feedback to Maven? And I think we started this in large part on the sales team. Kate and I both believe that feedback is an act of love and it is a gift, but it can be hard, right, to give, especially critical feedback to folks. But ultimately, we're really invested in making sure that we're all growing and that feedback is going both ways. So one is adding that culture of candid feedback and doing it in real time, making sure that it is 360 in nature. Two, creating a culture of high performance, right? And leaning into performance management in a way that I don't think Maven had done before. this is really incredibly important, especially when you're at such a mission-oriented organization. And I've been at a number of mission-oriented organizations before. You get a lot of people to join the company that are really excited about the work that's being done, but they don't necessarily have the right skill set to help realize that mission, right? So we worked really hard to make sure that ultimately folks felt as much connection to the commercial opportunity and really the commercial expectations as they did to the mission itself, and then reinforce that by clear key performance indicators, clear goals, key metrics that we really needed the team to align on and ultimately hit. And then lastly, celebrating our wins, right? That's a cultural component that is incredibly hard to do, particularly in a remote environment. And also, as important as celebrating our wins, celebrating the fact that we're learning even if we aren't winning, right? And we love to win here at Maven, but really sort of creating opportunities and natural relationships and touch points that allow the teams to come together and celebrate when things are going well, celebrate when we bring in a great new client in the door, and learn from when we have missteps, right? Every organization does. But I would say those are the three things that we've really integrated into the culture.
Wow, those were great takeaways. What was it? Feedback is an act of love. I love it. I am going to definitely write that down. Thank you. Okay, so let's transition here. So we've talked a little bit about, founder-led, your initial sales hire, and obviously building, this purpose-driven, high-performance sales culture. Let's talk about some best practices around some of the metrics around hiring, some of the metrics of setting goals and targets, and how you measure success. Kate, I'm going to go to you. I'm going to hit on hiring a little bit. So how did you source and develop relationships? I think you said you had some good advisors and mentors and around sales, but can you share some best practices or how you sourced and helped develop those relationship within sales that, since you've founded Maven?
Sure. So I loved listening to Isha. I think she's an example of a relationship that I'm most proud of. She's one of our just absolute star senior leaders on the team, not just in sales, but across the board. And, I think I sourced Isha. And I think one of the mistakes that I made, and I actually often tell the founders I work with today, early stage founders, is I was just hiring people from healthcare, and it's important to have people from healthcare, but I was hiring sales leaders that, didn't necessarily share the same values as that Isha and I share, or some of our other wonderful sales leaders here now share, which is, to deliver really, constructive feedback to help people get better and achieve their goals, to have a winning culture and be performance-based, to look at data and use data to drive decisions. And so I think ultimately, the second I kind of figured out that these were some of the values that I wasn't finding in some of our earlier sales hires. They may have been experts in healthcare, but for, when you sell employee benefits, there's also a lot of elements of a SaaS-like sales organization. It moves a lot faster than, for example, payer sales. And so you just needed a great leader. And so that was when, Isha was referred by a mutual friend, Ryan, and I always had really respected Ryan and his judgment. And so I think when you get referrals from people in your network where you really, really respect their judgment, people, like they're not going to send you, referrals that they don't necessarily stand behind. That's where, it doesn't matter what's on their resume, you make sure you're talking to them. Because I think one of the things that's so important to get right in sales hires and across the board is values alignment and culture. And so, and then of course, experience and people who know, how to do the technical chops of their job, but values alignment and culture is so critical. And so, so I would say, our Chief Growth Officer, Will Porteous, same thing. I actually met him through a board member, and he had worked for the board member at Bright Health, and she was like, you and Will are gonna, you really see the world the same way. You're gonna work so well together. And, he's been with us for about 1.5 years, and it's been that's also been a really successful relationship. So, and then on some of our individual sales hires that I had a hand in hiring. So I think this women's health as a market has taken a little bit longer to mature. And so therefore, some of our early sales hires really needed to have a more of a hunter mentality and not as much of a farmer mentality, meaning, they were not going to be given pipeline. They had to go out and figure it out. And so one of the things that was missing in the early days was Isha and Will and really amazing sales leaders to kind of coach those individual performers. And so one of the things that Isha has done, which has just been amazing to watch, is, she's been able to work with reps who've been at Maven for years, but without the right managers, and coach them to hit quota and coach them to perform. And I remember there's this one who was like, they were skeptical that Isha didn't have a background in healthcare. And then within 3 months, I got an email from her, and she was like, Isha's the best manager I've ever had in my life. So I think that, particularly for people in healthcare and or in industries where there's kind of a mindset to hire from within the industry. I think in terms of sales leadership and just leadership in general, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. And you really just have to find the best values aligned coaches with you and people who have a track record of performance.
Amazing. I heard an amazing stat. February 2023, Maven received 32,000 job applicants. That is amazing. So, Isha, you can maybe take this one. How do you approach finding, which out of the 32, you'll hopefully find some good ones there, but hiring the best fit candidate during a time? I think, obviously in the tech world, there's been layoffs and a lot of great talent in the market. So how do you approach this and finding the right fit?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks, Kate, for all those nice words. I'm just wiping away my tears here on this side. But February 2023, Maven received over 30,000 applications. The truth is, on the sales side, on employer growth at least, my bench was full. And that's really because we understood that our targets and our hiring needs actually needed to be, our bench needed to be full by the end of 2022 to make sure that we could, and our reps could be in full swing in this year's selling season. Especially what I have learned coming in as an industry outsider is there's certainly a seasonality to this business. And you really need to have reps in market in the early part of the year to be able to build the kind of pipeline that is necessary for us to hit our goals. But even outside of the 32,000, we still, when we did have openings on the employer growth side, receive hundreds and hundreds of job applications for our open roles. And so I think what happened prior to February 2023 and in February 2023 are not that markedly different. One is it's a very competitive market out there anyways. And Kate and I have talked a lot about making sure that we're, keeping our bar very high in terms of sales talent that we're bringing in. But there's certainly a few qualities that I look for individuals when I ultimately do speak with them. Of course, we have a fantastic recruiting team who puts folks in front of me when they apply to different Maven roles. I also very heavily leverage my own network. Like Kate, I respect and am in close contact with a number of sales leaders across a ton of different industries. And the truth is that there's going to be attrition, and sometimes people want to go try new roles, but want to stay in their functional expertise and feel a strong pull or drive to go apply their sales talent at a mission-oriented organization. That's certainly happened to me, and I got incredible referrals through my own network as well. And then I got a ton of cold emails and cold LinkedIn outreach. You'd be surprised how few of them actually seemed tailored. You'd be surprised how many actually took the time to understand likely or make guesses around what are we looking for at Maven when we're hiring a salesperson. And there is somebody on my team today that I hired based on a completely cold LinkedIn outreach. She understood what Maven was doing. She connected it to her own story, and she cut through the noise. At the end of the day, that's what salespeople are meant to do, right? So the fact that they feel comfort in cold outreach to somebody like myself, wanting to speak, giving me a reason why they should connect, whether it's prior experience or an idea that we could leverage. It is still pretty rare, to be candid. But then in terms of when we do speak with individuals, regardless of how we ultimately find them in the first place, there's a few key qualities that certainly for me are non-negotiables. One is competitive drive and really willingness and enthusiasm around continuously pushing themselves and wanting to learn and grow. That's super, super important. Two would be around their own self-awareness, right? And three, coachability. Those kind of go hand in hand. Kate and I talk a lot about giving feedback. You want to give feedback to people who understand that that feedback will be helpful to them in the first place. So being able to coach somebody and actually have them identify areas that they know they're excelling, but also self-identify areas that they could use some support and leveling up, that's fantastic. And then lastly, that values, right? And that ability to collaborate with their peers, the sort of orientation around why are we doing what we're doing, and how is it making an impact and a difference. You put those four things together, and it's sometimes incredibly hard to find, but I feel very grateful, very blessed that we certainly have an entire sales team that represents these types of qualities that we look for.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I'm gonna definitely, I took some good notes there too, Isha. You have really good advice for our audience today. Kate, I'm gonna shift gears to talk about setting sales goals and annual targets in the early days, and maybe Isha, you can take it, maybe for the later days. How do you determine your annual sales goals and targets in the early days? Right, you've raised capital, now you've got to go and achieve sales targets. How do you set that?
Sure. So it's definitely, today it's more of a science, but it was certainly more of an art in the early days. I think thinking back to our Series A and our Series B, our Series A, we had a pipeline. We didn't even have Salesforce at that point. So it was all off of Excel. And, I think from a win rate perspective and assigning probability, to the different phases of the pipeline, we had no data and no idea. And we were really creating a category and making a market. So there was not a lot of also benchmark data for us to use. So we did our best in terms of what are industry standard benchmarks in terms of win rates, what are industry standard benchmarks in terms of, like at a company of our size, that had gone public, and we could see there, that we were able to talk to some of those early employees, like what were they doing at the Series A and Series B, and we were getting some of that information from the investors too. So we were putting our best guess forward, and it was, of course your forecasts get more accurate over time, but I think in those early days, I remember there was one year where we like blew it out of the water, which often never happens because we just got one big deal, and then we massively underperformed because of the lumpiness in the sales cycle, that some of the big deals we thought were closing in December actually closed in February, and so we still got the deals, but we were really trying to hone that forecast, that accuracy muscle. So I think my advice to early stage founders is just to at least know your inputs. And so that if somebody asks you, I would hope your board is asking you, why do you have this forecast and what are the inputs, that you actually are on top of your input metrics. And then if they start to change, you're being upfront about that and you're ahead of that and adjusting that accordingly, and always kind of alerting, your board that, oh, this input metric has changed, because, it really is an art. And so I don't think there's an expectation to get it, completely spot on in the early days. I also think one thing I wish we had done that we didn't is we should have used ranges in the early days. I think in 2018 or 2019, it was like to the decimal point of what we were going to hit, which of course we did not hit that because we did not have the data to inform an accurate forecast. And so I think that the ranges is definitely much better in the early days, and then those ranges get smaller and smaller over time. But and then you go public and you're still giving ranges, but again, they're pretty small.
Isha, do you have anything to add on setting goals maybe later since you've joined, or if anything has changed?
Yeah, I mean, it all builds off and piggybacks off of what Kate shared already, right? Of understanding, number one, your sales pipeline, right? So we start on our end looking at what does our total sales pipeline look like? What should it look like? What has it looked like historically? And ultimately, what can it look like in the future? That's both from a total perspective as well as from a probability adjusted perspective. And that probability adjusted component is when you start to apply conversion rates, right? We look at conversion rates, or the ability to turn an opportunity into a client, essentially, across a number of different factors. Of course, you can do it by rep. We tend to do it by segment. So we have different segments here at Maven based on the size of the employers that we're talking to. And we have these different conversion rates and conversion rate assumptions on these because these deals just look very, very different. The sales velocity or the sales cycle can look dramatically different. When we sell to a small client, at times it can be a matter of days from our first conversation with them to bringing them in on as a client. And those are fast paced. Those are really exciting. And then, but of course, those deal sizes are much smaller. And the conversion rates are incredibly, incredibly high there for Maven. But when you start to move into the upper segments, of course, conversion rates are very strong still, but usually look a little bit different. Deal sizes, of course, are very different. And the average sales cycle takes a long time. So at times, 6, 12, 18 months, it's not entirely unusual for our largest deals. And so when we start to look at all of these in conjunction with one another, we can look at our historical data, what ultimately led to the creation of this total pipeline number, as well as the probability adjusted pipeline number in historical years. What are the headwinds that we are facing as a business, if any, in any given year? What are the tailwinds that we have that are helping us accelerate our ability to build pipeline? So at Maven, for example, we have really fantastic channel partners that help us accelerate getting in front of a number of clients. And then ultimately, once you understand that, you can come up with a total pipeline target for the sales team and then break it down by different segments, by different territories. It is probably a lot more of a science than when Kate originally started, but I don't want to understate there is a lot of art that goes into it still.
Yeah. To the extent that either of you are comfortable sharing, how has the current economy played into any potential adjustments that you would have to make to these goals? And then and if you are, how do you deal with communicating that to your board?
Sure, I can take that one. So we've just passed the first quarter of the year, and we're very fortunate, knock on wood, to have hit our pipeline goals in Q1. So, I think one of the wait and sees in the economy right now for everyone is the pipeline going to push into next year because people are going to delay buying decisions, or if people say they're going to be buying this year, is that still going to happen? And I know that the Fed yesterday kind of said, okay, we're going into a mild recession. There's a lot of uncertainty still. So I think it's still too early in the year to kind of see whether the economy is going to affect this year's numbers. But I think from a Q1 pipeline, as well as just in general, the need in the market for our product, we are in a very fortunate position to continue to see the type of growth we projected at the end of last year.
Great, very good. Okay, Isha, maybe you can share with me a little bit around KPIs and measuring success. Obviously, revenue is a big one. We heard a little bit pipeline, just Kate mentioned. how do you measure success? And then any tips you have for our audience for setting meaningful, I always say ambitious but achievable KPIs?
I think that ultimately you have to set the right ones in order to be thinking about ultimately what does success look like. So those KPIs will look quite different organization to organization, but there are going to be ones that remain consistent. So at Maven, for example, the ones that we try to anchor around and certainly look at in terms of our team is what is the volume of, if you think of top of the funnel, of course, in terms of just pure prospecting and outreach, what's the volume of activities and outbound efforts look like, right? Is it enough based on the conversion rate of outbound prospecting to get a meeting in the first place? So for one set of our sales team, which would be our outbound SDRs, for example, is the volume there in terms of identifying the right people and connecting with them and delivering enough value in your outreach to ultimately get a meeting, right? And so that is a key metric, particularly that this SDR or sales development team is oriented around, of that initial meeting achievement with the right buyer or the right champion and influencer at the target organizations. That's not necessarily the focus for our closing sales team. So for our closing sales teams, our sales leaders look at, of course, I mentioned total sales pipeline as well as probability adjusted. And you really have to look at it in both ways, because if you have a rep, for example, that is every week they're adding millions and millions of dollars to their total pipeline, but they're not seeing the same spikes in probability adjusted, what that tells me as the sales leader is this person is building a lot of pipe, but they're actually having a challenge in moving it down the sales funnel. So we have very clear entry and exit criteria for each sales stage that we have here at Maven. So essentially all of our sellers are orienting around the same criteria when they put an opportunity into their pipeline or move it down a stage. So we look at ultimately what does that total pipeline look like, and what does that probability adjusted pipeline look like. They should be growing in unison, right? To show that the rep is actually able to progress it down. If not, it helps me as a sales leader identify where they might be struggling. And that's where the opportunity for coaching comes in, right? To understand, okay, what happens in this second meeting, in this third meeting that is preventing it from ultimately going into final evaluation? Or why is it stuck in contracting for so long? Is there something that I could be doing to help you as a sales individual kind of get it out of facing internal roadblocks? Conversion rate. So we look at our historical ones and certainly apply a healthy pressure to the team to continue to drive up those conversion rates. And then on the deal size, right, Maven sells access to a number of different programs. And certainly we want our team looking at how can we sell in the entire suite of Maven services to any prospect and ultimate client, not just because, of course, it's great for us from a revenue perspective, but of course, it provides a really nice support system ultimately for the members at any life stage they might be going through. So certainly we have some deal size metrics that we look at as well that shows our reps' ability to really drive decision makers to think about supporting all of their employees and members, and the deal size will be a reflection of that. And then lastly, the sales cycle length, right? So where are teams getting stuck? Do you have a rep that's able to close business much quicker than perhaps their peer set? What are the things that they're doing differently than others, and ultimately coming back and sharing the learnings? I would say those are the ones that we look at from a KPI perspective most closely, definitely on a weekly basis.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Before I jump to the do's and don'ts, Kate, I'm wondering if you can help us maybe discuss a little bit of how you build a sales team for a B2B business versus like a direct to consumer. Like, are there any nuances our audience should be thinking about?
So I actually never have built a team for direct to consumer. So I actually don't know. Maven has always been B2B. I mean, we have a consumer product in market that we launched with, but we have never actually pushed it. So I feel very fortunate not to have been living by LTV to CAC, ratios. And really, it's always been a B2B sales org.
Okay, then that's what we'll focus on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's jump to talking about some best practices and do's and don'ts. Isha, I think following your many years of sales experience at companies like Google and Tracy, what are some mistakes that you've seen sales leaders make as they build out their teams?
For sure. And I have made my share of mistakes as well. I think that's the best learning that you can get is when you do something and you don't necessarily stand by that decision later. So a couple come to mind. One is putting off having the tough conversations. There's going to be times where you encounter a rep or somebody on the sales team that frankly is just not the right fit for the organization. And that does not mean that they have never been the right fit. Companies and jobs, they're like relationships, right? You grow together, hopefully, but sometimes one will outgrow the other. And so you have to have people that are continuously growing together. And historically, I think one of the biggest mistakes I have been is not catching that soon enough and not helping my team members really either get up to speed or frankly find a better opportunity that is better suited to where they are in their own career and their own aspirations. It's a lesson I learned many years ago and haven't, knock on wood, had to deal with again for a while. But I see this being a mistake that many sales leaders make over and over again. And it's hard and it's challenging, but it's absolutely the right thing to do. Number two, I would say hiring salespeople without actually watching them sell. And that sounds so obvious, but sometimes you meet an incredible salesperson and they say all the right things in an interview and they make you feel special and like they're going to be a great fit for the organization. And they might be, but you'd be surprised how many individuals ultimately, when you put them in essentially kind of a behavioral or mock pitch setting, totally bomb. And just because you bomb doesn't actually mean that you're totally out of the process, but do you understand what you did well in that process, what you did well in that pitch, and where are the areas that you thought were some gaps? When salespeople can't seem to answer that, that's of course a huge red flag for me. But I would say never hire a sales rep without having them go through a mock interview or a mock pitch.
Excellent. I am taking note of that one too, Isha. Thank you. So Kate, let's go to you. What is your advice for first-time founders or sales leaders on the call looking out to build their first sales team?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Isha just hit one of the biggest ones, which it took us a few tries as well to learn, which is to watch the mock pitch. It's really, really important because, your sales team is the front line of evangelizing your product and your mission in the market. And so they need to know how to pitch and tell a story. And I remember there's this one amazing woman on Isha's team that right when Isha joined, she joined at a similar time, and her mock pitch just like blew everyone away. And it was like the second, so her interviews, I mean, everyone's interviews can be fine, but it's really, that people can have really stand out mock pitches. And if they do, go get them and go hire them. So that's number one. And I think maybe my number two is that similar to how I kind of mentioned the story about Isha really just taking this team that was hungry and wanted to sell and perform and really helping them do that. I think when hiring sales leadership, it really comes back to the fact that, you're hiring a coach for a team and really to look for those coaching qualities. I think there's a lot of great sports leaders actually and sports coaches that have written books. Like one of my favorite books on leadership is actually Bill Walsh, who turned around the 49ers from like one of the worst teams to one of the best teams. And he has just a lot of incredible anecdotes. And it's just, he was such a talented leader and coach. that I think it's really important that if you have a great team that, maybe is technical and from the industry that you work in and know your product, that, when you're finding them that coach, though, they're not going to perform without that coach. And a coach is the difference between, you can take the same group of people and and under a different coach, none of them will perform. And under, a different coach, all of them will perform. And it really does matter. And so I think that took me, again, a second to learn, where I wasn't really judging leadership on those kind of abilities. I was really judging them on their resumes. And that was not the right, the right metric and framework.
I love it. A Bay Area fan myself of the 49ers. That was a great analogy. I actually want to follow up with Isha about, or Kate, you mentioned it as well, this mock interview. Is that, or are they doing a pitch, being a Maven salesperson and then pitching, and then what do you see the benefit of that beyond just seeing them in action? What other skills do you get to observe in that way?
Yeah, totally. You observe their ability to build genuine relationships quite quickly. At the end of the day, Maven, unlike, somebody that might be selling SaaS, this is somewhat of an emotional sale as well. And so ability to build a true emotional connection quite quickly to the buyer has been, I'm not going to say it's integral, but we've seen it be very helpful in ultimately landing the deal. The self-awareness and coachability that I shared towards the beginning of our conversation, at the end of every mock pitch, before I tell them my perception or give them feedback, and we give feedback right away. You don't have to wait days or weeks to hear it from the recruiter. You get it right away at the end of your pitch. Is, how do you think you did? What parts of your pitch do you think really stood out? And where do you, if you were to do it again, would you do something differently? So that self-awareness and that coachability or enthusiasm to continue to grow are great qualities that I'm able to extrapolate from that pitch. Third would be, how do you deal with ambiguity, right? They're pitching Maven as never having worked here. And so watching them answer, I don't know the answer to that question. You can learn a lot about a person, about how they operate in a very ambiguous environment. And of course, sales is one of these various ambiguous environments. Maven itself is a very fast growth company that evolves quickly. We have a lot of evolutions in our product. There's a lot to learn. And so when you go out and you sell, even our most tenured, our best sales reps that have been there, since day one of having a sales team, they're not going to know everything. And so how do they respond in that environment? You can learn so much about an individual.
Yeah, and I think an added benefit too is when you do hire that person, they've learned a lot about your solutions already because they had to do a lot of the homework. So it's an accelerated ramp time, I bet.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. I am going to ask one final question for both of you before we go over to the questions that were submitted by our audience. For both of you, whoever wants to go first can jump in. For those that are looking to build a high-performance sales team, we heard a lot about that high-performing sales culture today. What are 3 key takeaways you hope every founder or sales leader on the call takes away from today?
Isha?
To start, I would say number 1, test your own assumptions about what the person should look like, right? And that could mean their resume or their past experience, but really, do they have the qualities and that hunger for growth and learning? And can they actually apply that quickly? So don't go off of just what you think or who you think you should hire. Who do you want to hire, right? Who's going to be that person that can help you take your organization from 0 to 1, right? Number 2, look for people who are comfortable in a very quickly changing environment. I think everybody says they want to work at a startup. A lot of salespeople say they want to work at a startup. I don't know that everybody actually wants to work at a startup. It's hard out here sometimes, right? There's a lot of changes. And so making sure that you are testing for nimbleness, for comfort in org design changes, in managerial changes, in just change in general is really critical, because they're going to have a really hard time performing if they are not comfortable with that sort of expectation or reality in the first place. And really look for building a very diverse sales team, both in lived experience and industries, et cetera. And then lastly, and I tell this to a lot of people that are hiring sales individuals for the first time, you're going to come across a lot of people that are incredibly financially motivated, and they're going to share that financial motivation with you in a way that maybe has not been something that you are historically used to. I think in our culture, it's a little bit cringy, or people don't like talking about money. When you're hiring salespeople, you want them thinking and talking about money.
Great. Those are great takeaways. Kate, how about you?
Yeah, I would just say the only other thing to add is product, right? So I would say that some of our best people really just understand our product, whether it's because they've used our product or they just are really interested in it. And our product is just so different from every other company in the market, and we have just such incredible user testimonials and user stories and impact stories that I think, particularly for our sales team, to just really, really know that and be proactively reaching out to product marketing and proactively getting those stories is also a really important thing.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I am going to go over to our questions that were submitted live. This one is for Isha. And this was regarding your comment around value-based selling. And this comes from Sheila Egan. Has Maven had to change the value message as the current market has changed? Layoffs, budget cuts, things like that. So based on value-based selling, have you had to change that messages?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are always evolving and tweaking and refining our message to be reflective of the current, whether it's the economic climate or whether it's just the reproductive health climate. There's been a lot of impacts that have meaningfully sort of changed the way women's and family health is viewed today. Last year, for example, there was sort of like a perfect storm happening in the market. One is that companies were incredibly quick and eager and enthusiastic to make sure that they brought in benefits that ultimately really helped with talent attraction and retention, as the war for talent was insane, right? I'd say the war for talent is different today, but good talent is good talent. And so the nature of the conversation has certainly changed, but the core message of how do you attract and retain really your top talent is similar, but the way that we talk about it is different. And when you think about value-based selling, what our focus is on is really ensuring that our buyer and our buyers in some cases are well equipped, Maven or not, to handle these changes and make sure that they're ultimately helping their employees navigate kind of a pretty scary world out there. How we talk about it certainly changes. We focus a lot around ROI. We focus a lot around health outcomes. We've always done that, but they might take more of a center stage in a time where organizations are definitely more budget conscious. So it's not that they've changed fully, but certainly the way that we position them does evolve.
Right, thank you. The next one goes to Kate, and this is from Nanette Yu. Kate, what kind of milestones should we achieve in order to transition from founder-led sales to that first sales hire?
Well, I think just again, it comes back to budget, right? If you have pipeline, if there's all of a sudden you're feeling like you can't handle, and there's more opportunities to go get, and you need more resources, and you have the budget to do so, then I think that's about the time to hire your first salesperson.
And I think you mentioned for you, it was the number of deals that you wanted to have under your belt, and you were looking to expand that number.
Yeah, I think it's important for founders to sell the first deals, because then you're the one actually training the next person. So,
yeah, okay, great. Let's go Let's see, another founder-led sales question, Kate. Maybe it's a follow-on. Was it always enterprise or smaller companies for your business at the very beginning? And then there's another follow-up to that. Let's answer that one first.
Sure. So I think it's important, enterprise sales are much more complex. They take more time, they take more resources. So I do think it's important to sell small companies first, to really learn, all of your processes, contracting, IT security, just the general implementation process. But the enterprise deal, it's really important then to go get your first one there, because a really happy enterprise customer can bring other enterprise customers. And so oftentimes, to really get a certain number of enterprise customers, they're talking to other enterprise customers to make sure that you can actually handle the volume and the scale. So it's also, you want to get a lot of small companies in the beginning to really just hone your own processes and really understand how users are using your product and whether you're driving the impact that you're promising in the market. And then once you have that data and have that information, then really going after some of those bigger enterprise customers is how we did it, and I think is pretty standard.
Great. And that question was from Kat Garcia. There was a follow-up on that, and you mentioned products and being product focused. How did you balance product build and managing sales for, since you were doing most of it in the beginning? How do you balance that?
Yeah, well, I think we were lucky at Maven. I started the business with our founding team is composed of mostly engineers. So we were always shipping product. And so I was doing a lot of the sales and then just kind of also understanding what the market was asking for. But again, I think what was always been core to Maven since day one and continues to be core is that we're very user focused and we build for the patient first. So we weren't listening necessarily to the early days in the market and what the buyers were asking for, because the buyers didn't actually necessarily know that, they wanted a return to work product to help new moms back into the workforce. We actually were the first company that launched that product. And we launched that product because it was a pain point that our users were telling us about. And so I think it's important, when you're creating new categories and when you're in underserved markets, to actually be very, very user focused and really just continually build for the user and follow that. And then really the sales side in the early days is evangelizing that. And then, and if you're solving a real user problem, some of the early user problems you're solving are so obvious now, but this notion of having postpartum care after you have a baby, that was not in the women's health care model. And in many places it's still not, but people weren't even talking about that as much in 2014. So we were able to kind of talk about how we were solving all of these problems and some of the early customer experiences and data, and then bring that to the market. I think now it's a little bit more of a balance where, we launched a menopause product last year, and that was in response to, not, of course, there's a major need there, but all of a sudden our customers on our client advisory board, and we're like, okay, we will buy something now. We had been asking them for a few years, do you want something? Do you want something? And then they were like, okay, we're ready. And so that's an example where there's clearly an unmet need, but we heard overwhelmingly from our clients that they were ready to buy and meet it. And so we prioritized that last year.
Amazing. Thank you. I want to thank both of you. This wraps up our Q&A. It was such a pleasure talking to both of you. I'm going to hand that back to Emily.
Thank you so much, Sherry, Kate, and Isha. That was such an insightful conversation. For anyone else who was maniacally scribbling down notes throughout that entire talk, don't worry. The recording of the talk today will be available on the Female Founders Fund YouTube channel. So make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you can rewatch, rewind, and share today's learnings with your friends. Big thanks to our partners at Amazon Web Services for co-hosting today with us, and to all of you who joined. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.